Hello, welcome to Modern Papist. My name's Ryan. I'm here with my priest, Father Eric Fidois. He's the pastor at St. Basil the Great in East Point, and today we're going to talk about attempted baptisms. The Vatican recently stated that when it comes to saying, "I baptize you in the name of the Father," if you replace "I" with "we," it's invalid. And so because of that, there's been a chain reaction, or rather a cascading of effect, in regards to the sacraments being applied. And in the Archdiocese of Detroit, that's felt very hard because recently we had a priest who wasn't a priest and had to go through all the sacraments from baptism to ordination because he wasn't baptized appropriately. And the deacon who did it said "we" instead of "I." And so Father Eric's here to kind of answer a few questions that I know I have, and I've asked him personally, as well as other questions that I've read about. So, do you mind taking some of those questions?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so the first question I think is the biggest one on our minds is, isn't this a bit technical? Is this something where it's the Catholic Church kind of overplaying their hand in the importance of baptism?
Well, I think some people out of fear prefer that it's just technical because it terrifies them how serious the sacraments are. It is not technical. It's the very basis of our faith. Jesus, not to be harsh, but Jesus made it pretty simple for us to validly confer the sacraments. And he did that for a reason. Even in the end of Matthew 28, he even gives us the formula, the Trinitarian formula for baptism. And so it's not technical because it's not just bureaucracy, it's not red tape, it's not just checking off some box. Because if the exact words, that is the essential words and actions, that is the matter and form, if those things are not there, then the sacrament didn't happen. Meaning, that's why it's the very specific words, and in baptism, the words that absolutely, the other words should be said that you're told to say, but the words that must be said are, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." Technically, you start with the person's name, and then you say, "I baptize you." But those are the essential words that must be said, just like, "For this is my body," is the absolute bare bones necessity for validity of the Eucharist. And "for this is my blood." So it's not just a technicality, it's the very basis of our faith. Otherwise, what would we be saying? We'd be saying that baptism is just an outward sign of what already happened, which some people do believe. But it's not. Something takes place that we can't see with our eyes, but it's supernatural. It takes place in the soul. And without those words, it didn't happen. It just looked like it.
Okay. And when it comes to all the other sacraments, it's because at the heart of it, it's baptism where the sacraments really draw the, I don't want to say power, but how would you describe that? Where without baptism, you can't do the other sacraments.
Yeah, canon law says it's the, let me see, it's actually, if people want to look, it's canon 849. Canon 849 says that baptism is the gateway to the other sacraments. Without it, it's impossible to receive graces from the other sacraments. Or it's impossible to even receive the sacraments. The Eucharist, for example, its validity doesn't depend on whether or not the person receiving believes it's the Eucharist. However, the other sacraments, somebody can't receive confirmation unless they're baptized. It's just, it's impossible. It's without baptism, it'd be like trying to live underwater without gills. If you try to get to heaven, you can't go to heaven without baptism. So.
Okay, and so when Archbishop Vigneron stated that it is out of justice that we seek out those that have been baptized, because this is a pretty big deal, given the case, it is out of justice. It's because, frankly speaking, from the Archdiocese perspective, they owe the people a baptism.
Yes.
And then every other sacrament, because of, the failings, flaws of those that did the baptism initially, that were under the jurisdiction of the
or
Archdiocese.
attempted the baptism.
Or yes, the attempted,
which is great. I think the Archdiocese uses great language to point out that, you know, because even saying, sometimes we'll loosely say invalid baptism, but that's not even technically true. It's attempted baptism. And there's a reason for that, because, and it is out of justice. You know, the Archbishop wrote a letter to the deacons and priests, which I don't believe that was public, but he mentions that as being it's a matter of justice. Even though we ourselves personally may not be responsible for it, it's out of justice because of our vocation, as he said.
Right.
It's essential to our vocation that out of justice we do everything we can to find these people so that they can actually receive baptism. Okay. And confirmation, etc.
And so yeah, when they go to receive communion, if they're not actually baptized, at that point they're just receiving bread.
Correct. No. That's not correct. The Eucharist is the Eucharist, regardless of whether or not that person is baptized.
Yeah, I misspoke.
But for them, they can't receive the graces. We can't guarantee that they receive the graces, you know, because they're not in a state of grace. First of all, you have to be in a state of grace to receive the graces of the Eucharist. You know, there is something very important to be said, though. There's a way the Archdiocese put it that was really good. I don't remember it exactly, but God doesn't ignore somebody's true intentions. If somebody believes they're baptized, they have no reason to believe they're not.
Right.
And they go to receive the Eucharist. Clearly, it's not their fault. So you can't say that they're committing a sin in themselves because they're not aware.
Right.
Although nobody should receive the Eucharist if they're not baptized. But God does not, although we can never guarantee that they receive the graces that somebody else would receive who's in a state of grace and baptized when they receive the Eucharist, we can say that God's not going to ignore their act of faith.
Right.
But we're not God, so we can't. The sacraments guarantee us; they're guaranteed means of receiving sanctifying grace. But we're not God, so we can't presume that He gives it to them in another way. Although we trust that He can, and He would.
Right. It's like that whole God is not bound by the sacraments.
Yeah.
So, but the normative expression.
But He's bound Himself to the sacraments.
Right. Yes. The normative expression of grace is through the sacraments.
Absolutely.
And so this would be why, say for example, like baptism of desire isn't applicable here because, well, I should say, for those that are alive, baptism of desire isn't applicable because they can still receive it in the normative means.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Whereas, like, those that have died, obviously, you know, if I, you know, it's like if I attempted to go to confession and I died on the way, you know, the understanding is that, well, He would have, God, you know, knew that you were sincerely going to confession.
Your intention is important.
Right, and so in the case of baptism, that's where baptism of desire would be, you know, they died thinking that they were baptized when they weren't.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's complicated, but it's not.
Because they're alive, we have to seek them out, and there's no way, humanly speaking, there's no way we can reach every person. Because we're speaking about the specific deacon in this case, and I know there was, I think it was over 400 attempted baptisms in that time period from 1986 to 1999. So they have to seek out, and in fact, one of the people might be one of my spiritual directees. Like she has to look into it to see who she was baptized by,
That's really unfortunate. Sorry, I know I laughed, but it's unfortunate. Like
it's because they're alive, you can't just say, oh well, let's just try to ignore this and just sweep it under the rug. There's a priest I know well who works in the diocese that said, yeah, I mean that's going to be the first temptation is to ignore it. And I don't want to presume this, but I'm sure that happens in other dioceses. I don't want to be pessimistic here, but that is a real temptation to just ignore it and hope that God can just make up for it somehow. But he gives us simple things to do. All we have to do is do what we're told to do and read the right words.
But I mean, I guess it makes sense though, given that the Vatican just recently stated this. So, I mean, clearly it's not just the Archdiocese of Detroit. For the Vatican to come out and say it so clearly, like, and you know, for a lot of people, it's like, it's just one word. It's like, well, yeah, but it's you're supposed to be, what, if I understand it correctly, you're supposed to be acting as the person of Christ, yes, baptizing them, even if it's a lay person.
That's why you must say I.
Yeah.
And that's what the Vatican Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith made clear.
Okay. And so...
Now that wasn't known by the rest of us specifically,
right,
to say that it must be I instead of we. However, we would... Yeah, this is why you just don't stray from the words, right, because then you don't have to worry about that.
Well, I guess since we're talking about straying from the words, let's go into something that might be brought up, or has been brought up a few times, from what I've seen, is Ecclesia Supplet. I don't know if I said that correctly. I'm not great at Latin.
That was it.
Okay, great. But the idea that, well, a priest can kind of like use that as kind of an excuse to not address this.
Yeah, that's really the temptation. Ecclesia Supplet just basically means the church supplies. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think what's really important, I'm going to give a quote that the Archbishop, when he wrote a letter he wrote to priests and deacons, he saw this coming, you know, that this would be in people's minds. He said, while we may be tempted to think Ecclesia Supplet, this phrase refers to the church supplying in the realm of jurisdiction, whereas the situation before us concerns matter and form. Meaning the church can supply, he means in terms of jurisdiction, as in church law, certain matters. But absolutely, the church cannot make up for something that had to be said and done. That's not what that means. And there is a misunderstanding among, you know, some priests and deacons, bishops, you know, about what that really means. It kind of just sounds like a get out of jail free card, but that's not what it's meant for.
Right.
So it's only in the realm of jurisdiction, not in matter and form.
Okay, so like the Archbishop's been pretty, I mean, it seems based off what you said and what you shared with me, the Archbishop has been pretty thorough in explaining to priests, like, and deacons, as well as the laity, like when I read the letter, that, you know, he's taking this pretty seriously, and he's given a lot of the reasons, like, for it. When it comes to looking at the past in the Archdiocese, so we had a deacon, what is it, like 1986 to 1986 to 1999. Attempting to baptize people. Is this a one-time event, or is it kind of being looked at in a more deeper sense?
Do you mean like
basically, like, there's the angle of, was he alone?
Okay.
And what I mean, obviously the cascading effect of this is, no matter who did it, you know, you have to take it seriously, and you have to do your due diligence and make sure that the person becomes baptized. But I mean, as the person who was attempting, did he have an influencer, or did he influence other people to do the same type of thing?
Well, I mean, I can say, it's not being pessimistic, it's just realistic that I can't imagine that there aren't other priests or deacons who, maybe not even just this word, but maybe other words like creator, sanctifier, redeemer, because some of them would do that, which that we've always known would be invalid.
Yeah, it's pretty obviously like wrong.
But like, you know, but you know, clearly the Archdiocese is not ignoring this possibility. We don't know why the deacon did it, and I don't want to be harsh, but it doesn't really matter what his intentions were. He did something wrong, regardless. But if he learned it somewhere, or if it was a popular thing that was kind of like talked about among other deacons or priests. This was anticipated. So so the Archbishop also, one of the only other thing I'll quote is that he says, with your question, remember he's writing this to priests and deacons. I need to insist upon your own adherence to the rubrics of the liturgical books. As the Second Vatican Council reminds us in the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, Sacrosanctum Concilium, no other person, even if he be a priest, may add, remove, or change anything in the liturgy on his own authority, end quote. Then he says, if you have adapted the sacramental form of baptism in your own ministry, that is, if you've changed it, or if you are aware of baptisms ministered by others who have changed the words and or elements, I need you to let my vicar for clergy or one of the regional bishops know so that the validity of these sacraments can be assessed. So yes, they are anticipating it.
Okay.
They know that you can't just pretend that this is going to be one person. But this is a very important matter. The Church presumes the validity of the sacraments, right, unless there's evidence to the contrary. In this one, there was clear evidence from video footage from the priest who thought he was a priest. That's just reality. Yep, that's my cat. The priest who thought he was a priest, and he had no reason to believe he wasn't. The Archbishop had no reason to believe he wasn't. That he happened to see the video from his father putting all their videos on, making them digital during the lockdowns, and he happened to see the deacon say, "We baptize you," and he immediately contacted the diocese. Now, when he contacted the diocese, the Vatican hadn't said yet whether or not we or I,
right?
But then providentially, a couple months later, they find out in the beginning of August, the Vatican says it's been determined that, the Lord has revealed to them through the promise of Jesus that his church, that the gates of hell will not prevail against her, that we is invalid. And so immediately he contacted the diocese, and the Archbishop baptized him, confirmed him, and he still had him go on the canonical retreat, which is required, like a 5-day retreat. And that may sound silly,
I know,
but it's because our Archbishop takes it so seriously, because you have to have that, and you have to make sure your intention is formed before you're ordained. And so the Archbishop takes it very seriously. So he had him go on that retreat as if it was his first time. And then he ordained him a deacon, and I think a couple days later ordained him a priest.
Okay. That's quite an amazing story when you think about it. Like,
thank God it had only been 3 years.
Yeah.
Since even then, though, it just shows what happens when we don't do what we're told to do. And I don't mean that just out of some blind obedience. We trust, the Church is guided by the Holy Spirit in her official teachings. Right. And not just in opinions. That's not what we're talking about. But we trust that, and that's why it's so important, as Archbishop pointed out, to follow the liturgical books as what it tells us to do. So so the Church presumes that the sacraments are valid unless there's evidence to the contrary, and that was the evidence from that video. Now Father Matthew Hood, at the time he wasn't Father Matthew Hood, but that he had discovered from his father providentially, which there's no doubt about the Lord's providence, in pointing this out and making this known.
All right, so with this, you have this cascading effect. So you have these couples who get married. One of them was attempted to be baptized by this deacon, and you think it's a Catholic marriage, but it's not, right? Like there's actually no sacramental grace there.
Yeah.
There's something. There may
not
be
only
something.
Not only that, it's not a marriage.
Oh wow.
This is where it gets really messy, because the Church, everyone who's baptized. Well, let's say there's two people that were married. They were both baptized Catholic. One of them finds out that they were not validly baptized. That's an invalid marriage automatically. Not just non-sacramental. It's not even a marriage. Because baptized Catholics are subject to the church's law.
Right.
And so I mean the form of marriage, not matter and form. The form of marriage has to be observed, and that right now it hasn't always been the case, and the church can change this. But right now, the church for quite a while has required that it must be done, in a Catholic church, by a priest or deacon, because they are an official witness to that.
Sorry, phone.
Okay. They're an official witness to that. It didn't stop the timer, right?
No, it's good.
Okay.
It's good. Yeah, we're good.
Because they're an official witness to that. And the thing is, because and this is hard, to accept for people, because there's a lot of Catholics who don't know this and get married outside of the church.
Right.
And their marriages are automatically invalid if they do that, even if they don't know. Even if
you need a dispensation, right?
Yeah, you must receive a dispensation. And because, and this is where some people might try to criticize it as being bureaucratic, but it's actually humility on the part of the Archdiocese to recognize that we don't, if somebody wasn't baptized a Catholic and they got married, then that means they were not following the form of the church, not because of their own fault. It has nothing to do with them.
Right.
So because of that, you need dispensation to marry somebody who's not baptized. And I know it sounds weird because there's two people who look baptized, Catholics, but one of them wasn't. So it means technically they were a pagan, like in a technical term.
Right.
And because of that requires a dispensation from the bishop for a marriage to take place when one of them's not baptized. It also requires a dispensation, if one of them's not Catholic, which would obviously fall under this too.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing is, if they're two individuals where one of them thought they were Catholic and the other one wasn't baptized, it would be a valid marriage.
Oh, really?
Because they were both unbaptized. It would be presumed that their marriage was valid because neither of them were subjects of the church's law.
All right, so it's because there is the kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out type of situation, not voluntarily in this case.
And because marriage is one of the sacraments that is absolutely, church law can determine its validity. That's why this is so important.
So there's marriage. Okay, yeah. So there's marriage now. Confirmation, obviously the same thing as one of the initiation sacraments. But how I kind of look at it, I always look at it as marriage and holy orders as being equivalents. Mm-hmm. And so it would make sense that, not to say that they are in the sense, because I know there's some marriage. Yeah,
marriage is the only sacrament that the validity technically comes from the consent of the two.
Right. The I do's.
Yeah.
That's where the Princess Bride got it right. So
where he said you didn't say I do.
Right, you didn't say I do.
He was
so
right.
It doesn't count.
He was right.
And performative utterances is what it's called. But the holy orders, I always look at them as being equivalent. I know there's some married priests, especially in Eastern rites, but growing up, that's how I've always come to look at it. It's either you get married or you go in the priesthood. That's the same thing, and because it's from the priesthood that a lot of the sacraments are dispensed, you just have this multiplier. And in the case of fatherhood, when it comes to him standing at a marriage, because he doesn't technically marry the couple, like we just said, it's the couple that marries each other. If there isn't another witness,
but you must have an official witness of the church.
Right. So if there isn't another witness.
And he wasn't an official witness because he wasn't a priest.
Right, he was an official witness. So if there was a deacon at the marriage as well, at the wedding, would that
could
count?
Be debatable. I think he would have to be the one officiating though.
Okay.
I'm not positive, but I think he would have to be the one officiating for it to.
Okay, we'll look into that. I mean, this is pretty technical.
There's a reason why the diocese gave us their contact, all the people to contact if we come up against this.
Which will definitely be down in the description. All this information that you can link to. The Archdiocese has done. I don't know if other dioceses has been this thorough, because I think the Archdiocese has been really, especially with fatherhood.
I pray
pretty thorough about it
because, like Father Hood said, like he was, people can only imagine how just devastated he was.
Yeah.
But he said, even though he was so devastated, he said, if possible, the Archbishop was even more devastated than he was.
Yeah.
Just
right, and that was, we're talking about, and I think this is, I look at it in great, as a great work of I guess justice, but the fact that the the Archbishop is doing this when, from my understanding, he wasn't here when it happened.
Of course not.
Like, this was like, what? This over 20 years ago, and Archbishop Vigneron's been here for like
13. Now.
Right, it's his responsibility now. So it's
mine too. If I find people who need to be baptized and confirmed,
and that's very assuring from that stance that he would he's willing to take it
seriously.
Yeah,
he should
seriously. Don't get me wrong. Like,
he should take it seriously, but it doesn't mean every bishop would.
Right, and that's really the angle that I'm kind of looking at it. Is I hope that other people look at the Archdiocese of Detroit like as an example for how to do this.
Yeah.
Because we have a priest that was affected by this, as well as probably thousands of people that need to be correctly baptized.
We know at least 400 something.
Right. Well, but I'm just saying. But if they got married, and then if they got you're potentially just influencing so many people.
I think another thing that's good to say, because people will ask it, it's kind of random. It doesn't illegitimate children.
Right.
I don't know why people still think that.
That's more of like,
because that's a civil matter more of when people were illegitimate.
Yeah, that was like kings and stuff.
It affected like more civil law matters.
Yeah, like heirs and stuff like that.
Yeah, but
something that the church doesn't. Well, yeah, that's history. We can do that in another way. But what is it? So we have holy orders, we have the baptism. So confession, though, I think like that's the most interesting one.
So you're talking about
fatherhood. Yeah, or any priest who thinks they're ordained. So if I were to go to him when he wasn't ordained, my confession wasn't heard.
No. Now God heard your confession.
Right.
He absolutely heard it. He knows that it's not your fault. It's not his. It's not Father Matthew Hood's fault. But we can, like I said before, we can't guarantee, because the sacraments guarantee, as long as we're properly disposed, they guarantee sanctifying grace. But because of it, we can't guarantee it. However, it doesn't mean that God can't work outside of it.
Right.
It doesn't mean that he can't work outside of that sacrament, not because he doesn't think the sacrament's important, but because he knows everything.
Right.
And he sees your intention, and he knows that it's not your fault.
So would you still, in that case then...
I would still tell people they should go to confession.
They should go to confession. Yeah. That's what I was getting to. Because
well, the Archdiocese said too, like if they knew that there were mortal sins, that they had, if they remember that if there were mortal sins, that they had confessed. I think it's in the frequently asked questions part on the website. If they knew there were mortal sins that they had confessed before to Father Hood when he wasn't Father Hood, then they do need to bring those to the next confession in number and kind.
In number and kind.
Yep.
Just because a lot of people...
Yeah. Meaning kind by specifically what it is. You don't need to give gory details. Priests don't care for that. And the number. And sometimes you're not going to know the exact number, so you try to give frequency as best as you can to your ability upon your examining your conscience.
Council of Trent.
Yeah.
That's Council of Trent right there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I like bringing.
I was going to bring some stuff from Council of Trent today, but I got distracted by having to counsel somebody. So.
Oh, that's fine. Counseling someone is important. So all right, I'm trying to think if there's anything else because I think you answered all of my really important questions. Obviously there's last rites.
You gave me a list of. Yeah, just to go over last rites are invalid.
That's it was never the Eucharist.
It was never the Eucharist. Whenever Father Matthew Hood was celebrating Mass. That was.
Oh yeah, that's it. Okay, yeah. So
because some people, you know, like you don't want to discount.
Backtrack. Okay. So, can you explain the Eucharist in regards to Father Hood's situation?
Yeah. Since he, I mean, it helps if you just remember, he never was validly baptized. So that in itself means that anything he did, other than baptisms, because baptisms, by their essence, don't absolutely require that you're a priest or deacon, because in emergencies not only can the laity, but they should.
Yeah.
If somebody's in danger of death, they should baptize somebody in danger of death, only in danger of death. But so actually, his baptisms would have been presumed valid. You know, because even, you know, I don't want to say even, I'm not saying that layperson is like some lower form of being.
Right.
You know, but like even somebody who's not ordained.
Yeah, you can have like a
validly do that. Yeah, I mean, now they do have to have the intention of the church.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, like they do have to have the intention of the church, which means at least some kind of basic understanding of what we believe the Trinity is.
Right.
Because that's why Mormon baptisms are invalid. Because even though they often baptize in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, they don't truly believe in the Trinity, so that's why their baptisms are invalid. Anyway, because they're not Christian.
Oh wow! I didn't know that.
So it gets a little more complicated. Because one of the canon lawyers in the Archdiocese was talking about that in a webinar that they had on this for the priests recently. So the Eucharist, and this also helps people understand. No matter how much we believe that something's a Eucharist, if it's not a validly ordained priest celebrating the Mass, saying the right words, doing the right actions, and it's not the Eucharist. No matter how much we want to believe, it's not. That's why even Protestant denominations, there's very few, but there's some that will believe in the Eucharist, like some high church Anglicans.
Yep.
They'll believe in it, but it's not the Eucharist because they don't have the power to do it because that line was broken from bishops and it must be received. And so likewise, it couldn't be valid. However, like I said before, if people have no other reason to know that it's not going to be valid, they presume it's going to be valid. Then God's not going to just say, "Oh, gotcha," you know, like you're not going to receive anything from me. That's not how He's going to work.
Right.
You know, He's going to supply, but like I said, you have to be very reluctant to presume exactly what He does. But we can trust in His mercy that He's not going to ignore that person's their intention, that they thought they were receiving the Eucharist.
Right.
He's not going to ignore that when it comes to like merit for them.
And so, say you found this out on a Sunday, and you found it out.
You mean if I was a priest and I...
No. Say I'm a layperson and I'm
thankfully I know the priest who baptized me and I have no doubt that
he
would said it validly.
So say, alright, this is going to be an incredibly small pool of people, but I'm just trying to like see this. If I went to Mass on Sunday, but it was done by someone like Father Hood before he was ordained, and I found out midday that he was not actually ordained, that would mean then the Mass didn't actually happen. Which means that my obligation to go to Sunday worship would still be there, right? Once I knew.
Well, the Archdiocese, you know...
Aside from the...
I don't know if you mean like within the day itself. They didn't say specifically on the day itself.
Okay.
But they did say you did fulfill your obligation because you had no reason to believe otherwise. I don't know about the actual day itself.
Okay.
I don't really even want to try to answer that because I'm not exactly positive, about how to answer that. I would presume you did fulfill it because you went there. You had no reason to believe it wasn't the Mass, and people have a right to trust that it should be valid, and and this is why it's the Church went into a lot of detail around the Reformation because it was questioned that even a priest who's living in mortal sin, even a priest who has major doubts, doesn't invalidate the Eucharist.
Right.
As long as he has the intention to do what the Church tells him to do, he says the words, he does the actions, it happens.
Okay. Well, that's reassuring.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't think of anything else.
Okay.
I think that was pretty thorough. Maybe.
Yeah, I just got to pray that the Lord finds all these, because some of these people, undoubtedly probably don't go to church. Most of these people with this deacon are probably between 18 and, I'm 38, so they're probably between like 18 and 35 or something around there.
Right. They're around my age.
Unless they're also, could have been adults. But no, at the Easter Vigil, deacons, I don't think a deacon usually ever does the baptisms at an Easter Vigil, so
okay.
That may not affect people who are older. But as we see, it creates a cascade. When somebody becomes a priest later, yeah.
Thanks for joining us today as we were talking about the attempted baptism situation. Father Eric's my spiritual father at St. Basil the Great in East Point, in the Archdiocese of Detroit, so I feel very comfortable asking him questions. He's very knowledgeable, and if he doesn't know it, he does his research. We have debates all the time. This is our first time where we've actually recorded it, and so I'm really happy we did it, because it is an important thing. And it actually, the Archdiocese of Detroit became, headline news in the Catholic world because of it. I'm very glad Fatherhood, as I know we've talked about him a few times, I'm really glad that Fatherhood was able to rectify the situation. And I do agree with Father Eric that it was out of providence that it happened. As for this, if we want more discussions with theology, I'd love to have more that are recorded, as long as they're civil. No, I'm just kidding. We don't go, whatever. As for theological talks, I'd like to have more if you guys are interested in it, because I love talking about things that I'm not an expert in, because I may know a lot as just a lay Catholic, but I don't have any specific training, and I love talking to people who do. So if you're interested in this kind of thing where it's just us sitting down, give us a thumbs up or comment or something to let me know that this is something that a lot of people want. But yeah, if you could end with a blessing, or if you want to say something before that, if you have a comment before that, I'd love to hear it.
I don't know if
I know you've given a lot, but it's you're a priest, and this potentially affects more peers, or the people that come to you. You are directly dealing with this, so what do you feel about it? Do you think that the general tendency is, I'm not going to go into any more questions.
I'll tell you what I feel about it. And I think it's helpful to say, when these things are, it's kind of like what I told people when the former cardinal, former priest, former deacon McCarrick, Theodore McCarrick, when people find out about him, it's similar to that, to where you say, and I say similar, and some people may not like that. They may think oh, this isn't at the level of child abuse and homosexual predation. It's like, actually it is, because this is the most important thing that a priest and deacon, bishop needs to do, is to make sure the sacraments are given to the people as the Church intends them to be received. So, as I said then, it already existed. This was already a problem. Just because we didn't know about it doesn't mean it wasn't a problem.
Right.
But if we know about it, it's a lot better to know about it than to not know, because then you can actually rectify it and you can do something about it. Ignoring it doesn't make it go away. It creates kind of like problems that we may not even realize. Like my mother had said, who knows, you have all those people who are invalidly baptized. If those people are now validly baptized, that could help the Church out immensely.
Right.
In becoming more fervent. Because think about it, it's like, if they weren't validly baptized, then you have all those people that don't have sanctifying grace that thought they did, but now they can. So that's about all I have to say. Is it's better to know these things than to not know them,
right?
So that they can be rectified. And thankfully, in the Lord's providence, He brought it out. He made sure it was known. And I pray that other dioceses see it, and if they figure out, the Lord makes those situations known too, so that they can be rectified as well, because it's only better for the Church. And,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, the Lord be with you.
Oh, and with your spirit, I'm sorry.
and through the intercession of Saint Basil the Great and your guardian angels, may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Father. I really appreciate you doing this.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you asked.
All right. Thanks for joining us.